That's okay, but
Hello, Packers fans. Welcome into PackersNews.com. I'm Cassidy Hill, joined by Pete Doherty here on a lovely Wednesday morning in Green Bay, where Pete, the Packers finally have at least their initial 53-man roster set after cut down day yesterday. For the most part, kind of went to chalk, but there were a couple of surprises in there. Wouldn't you would be fair to say?
yeah, I mean, there's no huge surprises, but they have to make some tough decisions about because there's a lot of those guys they obviously want back in the practice squad,
Mhm.
and so they have to make these calculations about who they like better from guys at different positions, who they think. I think a big part of it is who they think is more or less likely to get claimed.
Mhm.
So the ones that jumped out to me, well, I'm just really intrigued by Caleb Jones. Not saying he's going to be a good player in the league or anything like that, but he's just got some really uncommon traits that his wingspan. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember looking it up really early in camp. And he didn't go to the combine, but if he had, he would have had the widest wingspan at the combine, which is a huge asset for pass blockers. And he's not quick, but for a guy who's 6'8 3/4 or 7/8, whatever it is, he moves okay, and I think he could be an interesting guy, and so they cutting him. There's a risk that some team will watch the tape from the preseason games and just feel really weak at offensive line and might take him for thinking they'll have a player in a year or two down the road, like the Packers did with Yash Nyman, for instance. So that Heflin, I really thought he might make it. Those are maybe the two that jump out most. I'm probably forgetting a guy or two that you're thinking of.
Let's actually, yeah, dive into the defensive line for a minute here. You mentioned Teflon, kind of surprised. Um, I I thought they would keep one of Heflin or Chris Slayton, and I really thought it would be Heflin. They didn't keep either. I know that that's a pretty deep unit, but are they okay to cut both Jack Heflin and Chris Slayton off the defensive line?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm sure they think both of those guys are going to be available for the practice squad.
Hmm.
That because there are positions, for instance, at running back they cut both Goodson and Taylor, and there was an argument for keeping it. They both belong in the league, and if they have to play, they'll do okay. But every team has guys like that,
Hmm.
so they don't. Nobody needs Probably nobody needs to claim a guy either of those guys. That was where the difference is, I think, with, for instance, that I thought with Caleb Jones was he plays a premium position
Right.
tackle, so maybe a team might be more inclined to claim him. We'll find out in a couple hours if anybody, or in an hour, a little more, if
Mhm.
anybody claimed him. But so the same might go for even a guy like Heflin. Most teams probably have guys of his type, so that they wouldn't need to go get one. But it wouldn't be a shocker if either he or Slayton got picked up. Both showed really well in the preseason, that's for sure.
Yeah, they did. They both had a great preseason. But like you said, those are the positions you can kind of afford to play with. That bottom depth offensive line, those are the ones where other teams are really mining that. So, as you said, kind of a risk to put Caleb Jones there. Justin McIntosh says, I read they aren't thrilled with their depth at outside linebacker and safety. Do you see them adding a vet in the next couple of days there? Keep in mind that safety, they cut Sean Davis. Obviously, would probably try to bring him back on the practice squad. He did have a knee injury earlier this week, but they're pretty thin at safety as it is.
They are. In fact, I'm writing about this today, and will be posted this afternoon, sometime after Brian Gutekunst's press conference at noon. But I especially agree at outside linebacker because, again, that is such an important position, and they're really strong at the starting spots. But I really question whether they have enough behind there. And both those
Mhm.
guys, Smith and Gary, played. They each played 68% of the defensive snaps, and they each only missed one game. So you can't play those guys every snap, and then if one of them gets hurt, there are real problems. I find it hard to believe. I'm really thinking there's good chance sometime before this season is over, somehow, some way, they add a veteran outside linebacker. They did it last year with Whitney Merciless, and that showed the risks of doing it. The guy had logged a lot of miles in the league, and he got hurt, and didn't play again. From when they picked him up, he played in a couple of games, got hurt, and didn't play again until the first playoff game. But somehow, some way, trade. Maybe they pick up somebody on waivers even today that they feel has some potential. But somehow, some way, I'm guessing they end up adding an outside linebacker before the season is done. And I would think it's a given if they lose either Gary or Smith. I think they would absolutely have to go get somebody.
And this may be a moot point if they add a veteran, but do you think they really liked what they saw with Kingsley and Barre, or is that more of a development guy?
Yeah, I'm not sure. There were flashes in practice, but in the preseason games, I can't say I saw that. It's kind of probably a combination of the two. They probably think there's some upside there and something to work with. And he is a rookie, so it's not that uncommon for a rookie to be a lot better, to improve a lot as the season goes on. So he could be a guy who maybe 2 months from now, all of a sudden he has a couple of solid games, and it's like, well, maybe they don't have that big need there. But I would still, I have my questions there, and I just think it's a position. I really think they're going to end up adding somebody somehow, some way before the season ends.
Speaking of adding someone in another unit, a good question here from Mike. I read that the Packers were in trade talks for the Jags wide receiver Laviska Shenault, but the Panthers got him. Does this lead you to believe they aren't set at wide receiver? Now, Pete, before you answer, I'm going to add in an addendum here. I think it was NFL Network or somewhere yesterday was talking about this, and they said it's not so much that the Jags wanted to add just any wide receiver, it's that they had been very the Packers wanted to add any wide receiver, is that they had been very interested in Shenault in the pre-draft process last year. He was a rookie last year, and that they had just been really, really interested in him ahead of his draft. And so that might have a lot to do with why they were in those trade talks.
Yeah, that goes when guys are earlier in their career. That's a big factor when they pick guys up. In fact, going to with Rasheed Walker and Caleb Jones, that's probably one of the reasons they kept Walker instead of Jones was they thought Walker might get claimed because somebody might have liked him more coming out in the draft. He was a 7th round pick and might have gone, a decent amount higher, but he had a meniscus injury in his knee at, last season. It's where he ended up shutting it down at the end of the year. So anyway, it doesn't mean they're not done at receiver. If I were them, I'd feel a little better about receiver now than I did going into camp. Romeo Dobbs has a lot to do with that. I think there's real potential there. And, Christian Watson, he didn't practice till late, but, he kind of flashed when he came back from the injury and the team drills he was doing. So I'm guessing they feel a little better, but Shenault's a talented guy. So, like you said, they did like him coming out, and they didn't do enough to get him. So it shows they still have their limits. I didn't see what Carolina gave up for him. I don't know if you know that off the top of your head, Cassidy.
I want to say like a 6th. It wasn't a ton.
Yeah, that's not a lot. So, that the Packers weren't willing to give up more than that.
I've got to be saying that wrong. There's no way that's all it was.
It doesn't seem. I would have just guessed maybe. I don't know if was he hurt last year? Did you say?
Not that I remember, but
okay. Maybe it was. I could see maybe a 3. Somebody gave up for him, a 3 or a 4. So I'm not sure what they gave up, but anyway,
I was not that far off. A 2023 7th round and a 2024 6th.
Yeah, that's not much. So that tells you something, because that wouldn't have been all that much for the Packers to cough up to get him.
Right. Let's actually talk about receiver for a second here before we go on to some more questions. I know that we debated a lot over the weekend, Toure versus Winfrey. We made our cases for keeping Toure over Winfrey, but didn't know if Brian Gutekunst would agree with us. Turns out he did.
Yeah. Upside over older vets who are a little more advanced. And again, with Toure, I don't know how much he's going to play, but he's going to get that practice time. And maybe if there's an injury or two, maybe by December, he'll have improved a lot too. Winfrey will probably get his chances this year, and he'll get elevated from the practice squad, a couple times at least. And maybe there's an injury that gets him signed back up. And we know Rodgers liked him based on what he was saying in camp. But upside over where they are right now. And Toure showed some real upside, I thought, in the preseason games and in a few times in practice.
Is Winfrey someone that you think the Packers will be able to get on their practice squad?
I would think so. Again, receivers kind of like running back, where everybody's got their guys. They've been working. They've been working with these guys. They're kind of marginal. Maybe make the roster, maybe not. But they've been working with them all off season and camp, so the guys know the system. The quarterback knows them. They all have their guys, so it's not like you'd be another team would be adding Winfrey for the practice squad, because if it comes to that, he's going to want to stay with the Packers almost surely. So you have to put him on your 53, and everybody's got their own guys. So I would guess chances aren't real good that Winfrey gets picked up. You never know. All it takes is one, but that would be that'd be my best guess, is nobody claims him.
Really great question here from Adam. Do the Packers think either Bach or EJ will be ready for week 1? Does keeping Walker signify they are worried about either?
So I don't know.
Walker's pretty versatile.
Yeah, and we haven't. You and I. I don't think the depth will come to Walker. You're getting pretty far down the depth chart there.
Mm-hmm.
Several guys that have to get hurt. And I'm curious to know what you think on this. But just based on when they brought Bakhtiari and Jenkins back, Jenkins was a week earlier, and based on all the issues Bakhtiari has had up to now, going back to last year in his comeback, I'm thinking, I think Jenkins is more likely to come back before Bakhtiari. I'm thinking, since he did practice after missing that day, he did practice on what is today?
He didn't practice Sunday, but he did Monday.
Yeah, today is Wednesday, so he practiced Monday. I still think Jenkins has a real chance to play in the opener. Like, if they've given us no indication. If I were a betting man, I would say Jenkins. I still think chances are better than not that he plays in the opener, and Bakhtiari no. But I'm just guessing, and I'm not sure what you think there, Cassidy.
I won't think that Bakhtiari's back until he runs out on the field and lines up.
Right. That's a smart approach.
At this point, that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
Jenkins, I think he could be ready for week 1. Does Flea take the chance on week 1, back where he tore his ACL on turf? Does he put him out there week 1? The only reason I could see that LaFleur fights for it is because it is a divisional opponent. But it's one that you should be able to handle on that side of the ball, I would think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. To playing on turf, and he never did. He didn't get to play in the preseason. So it depends on how many weeks they want of him doing team drills before they feel okay putting him on the field. And playing on that turf might make a difference in their minds. It'll be. I don't know if we'll have a better indication a week from today when they practice that on Wednesday. Maybe that'll give us a little better indication.
Yeah. And Mike says keeping 10 linemen leads me to believe that both guys aren't ready. They may
possibly, although they ended up having some depth at that position. I mean, Walker showed really well in that last preseason game. And like I said, I'm not so sure I wouldn't have kept Caleb Jones and cut one of the safeties, and if I were them. But so that would have been 11. So but I think the draft, Mike, for sure suggests to me, looking back, that they drafted 3 linemen. You always take linemen because there's 5 positions. But, I didn't go into that draft thinking, well, this is a 3 lineman draft. And they took 3. That had to be at least part of the thinking, was concerns about Bakhtiari, not just this year, but, longer term.
Sorry, I saw a question down here about the Bucs wide receivers, and I couldn't quite remember his last name, so I was looking it up. Tyler Johnson. Is that someone worth adding? I mean, I know it was a surprising cut for the Bucs, But like you said, the Packers feel a lot better about their receiver unit now than they did at the beginning of camp.
Yeah, I know next to nothing about the guy, so I really can't offer much there. Again, some of it would probably come down to what they thought of him, when he was coming into the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I get the feeling if I were them, I'd feel, it's not like I'd feel like, I mean, they don't have a receiver who just scares the daylights out of. There's no receiver teams are going to game plan around defenses. But if I were them, I'd feel a little better about receiver now than I did than I would have at the end of July when camp was starting up.
Well, I know we're going to get ready to go to Brian Gutekunst here soon, so I'm going to just do one final question here. I'm actually going to do two, but I'm not going to combine them. Gary asked, who's going to be the return guy, in-house or an outside player? And then Larry asked, what will they do with special teams? Seems like they are no better this year than last. Is it too soon to freak out about special teams? And how much can Amari Rodgers scare and or make you feel more confident about those special teams?
For the first question, I get it. I mean, guilty till proven innocent on special teams overall for this organization. We've said that a bunch of times. But I'll still cut some slack for the preseason games because they're playing guys, they're getting looks at guys, and they were, to see whether they should make the team or not. And a lot of those guys who were playing special teams won't even be on the roster. So what if they had played well, I wouldn't have given it much credence either because it's the real games and how they play in those. So that kind of answers that. We'll find out. We can better answer that question maybe 8 games in as to whether there's some improvement. I don't, Amari Rodgers is clearly a better player, a little more dynamic than he was last year. He's still not a guy who's going to put fear into special teams coordinators and on the special teams. They're just not going to be afraid of him. Whether they add somebody or not, that's anybody's guess. You never know who will be available, who they like, who might spring available in a month, or if they have an injury, maybe they can find somebody to add. And it turns out, they give him a shot and he's better than what they have. But as of right now, Rodgers is a better returner than he was last year, but he's still not a guy who's going to put any kind of big scare into special teams coverage units.
Right. As we said, we've got to get ready to head to Brian Gutekunst. I know there's some more questions coming in. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of them this morning, but we will be back later this week. Or actually, no, it's Labor Day weekend, so we'll probably dip out. Everyone else should as well. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend. In the meantime, Pete, I know you have some stuff coming this week. Do you want to tease anything or?
Sure, yeah. So like I said, this afternoon, I'm just going to share 4 or 5 takeaways from the final cuts and then anybody added today. Just, a couple of views on, what I think of what they did. And then tomorrow I'm doing our yearly end of camp Q&A with Brian Gutekunst. We usually talk for somewhere between 26 and 30 minutes, and we just run it Q&A.
It's a very specific number.
It is very specific, and it always comes out right in between there. And we run it in a Q&A format, so you get the full question and the full answer. And I'm going to turn that around, and that'll be posted first thing Friday morning, unless for some reason he has to back out of the interview between now and tomorrow. So that's something to look for. It's always a really interesting, really good read.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. So stay tuned to PackersNews.com for full coverage as the Packers kind of wrap up their offseason. And then next week, get ready and hit the ground running to prepare for the Minnesota Vikings. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks, Pete.